You bringing them in? Hamida, you want me to let them in? All right, here we go. Here come all of our friends. Good morning, all. It is 8:03, so we are rocking and rolling here. Thanks to those who are introducing themselves in the chat box. Please feel free to continue introducing yourself, getting connected with folks. My name is Hillary Watson. I am on staff at NEW. I'm an organizational development consultant. I will be co-hosting this morning with Hamida Bagarathy. So if you have any technical issues, feel free to message either of us or any questions or things you want to make sure that we cover this morning. We are here this morning to think about the new normal and to think about what it means to be in this strange phase of the pandemic, post-pandemic period, and to be at a turning point in terms of how we engage the world. So we have two wonderful guest speakers this morning who I will introduce in a little bit, but first I'd like to share a little bit just to get us grounded in this space, share a little bit about NEW and about what we'll be doing today. If you're not familiar with NEW, NEW is a nonprofit capacity builder. So our focus is really on building capacity for those mission-driven people and organizations who are working to make our community better. And in this space this morning, this is a space that we built to attend to nonprofit leaders and to think about for those folks who are leading nonprofit organizations. You are out in the community, you are nurturing organizational health, you are working with your own volunteers and employees, and thinking about the number of decisions you make, the kinds of strategy, the kinds of visioning work that you're doing, supporting you in that, and building some of those connections. We sometimes have this idea that leaders are supposed to be lonely, that to be in leadership means you're off over here making all the big decisions. And so this is really a space where we come together to build those connections. To find wisdom and resources that are responding to the kinds of decisions that you're making in this moment, and to talk through what are the ideas, what are the action steps that you're taking that we can exchange ideas and nourish each other's work and find those themes and connections in what each of us are doing. As we come into this morning, I want to recognize our norms for this space. We do start on time, we will end. I'm going to cut us off at 8:55 so that we can do our share a feedback survey with you and do some final wrap up. So we will get you out of here by 9 o'clock and hopefully with enough time to take a breath before whatever you have going on at 9 o'clock. We recognize that in this virtual space, there is surprises, interruptions, so please take care of yourself, take care of the folks who are in your space and attend to what you need. We also encourage you to make space, to take space, that there will be conversation space later in the morning. And so we invite you into that conversation, and that this is a supportive space. We recognize that the intentions of our words are often good and they don't always have that impact. So we want to recognize if there are spaces where, or comments made that have a different impact than intended, that we can attend to that. And that we are here with a common goal, that each of us are deeply embedded in nurturing our communities, in doing social service work, in working towards making the world better across Southeast Michigan. We invite you to be kind and be brave in this space, particularly as we talk about the new normal. We're going to be talking a lot about our hopes, but also about our fears. So we invite you to be brave with your fear, be honest and kind, and we're going to talk about, we're going to get a little bit scared maybe today, and that's going to be okay. We've got the support for that. We also invite you to use the tools in the space. You've got the chat box, the reaction buttons too, as you want to interact with how you're responding, how comments are landing for you, and then we honor the wisdom that all of you are bringing, that you are the experts in your own organizations and you have wisdom to share, and that this is a space for heart-centered listening and sharing, that we work from the heart. We work from our brains as well, but we can't get away from our hearts, right? Particularly in our mission-driven work. So I'm going to pass it over to Hamida for our icebreaker.
Thank you so much, Hill, for grounding us in how we're going to spend our time today. So, Hill mentioned that we might get a little scared today, knowing that some of the things that might scare us already exist for us, but it's sort of like surfacing and becoming aware of them. So for our icebreaker this morning, where you'll be in pairs, thank you, Hill, for working on breakout rooms. We're asking that with a partner, you both share your hopes and fears in returning to in person, also knowing that some of you have already returned in person, hybrid, all kinds of variables. Some of you are not going to be returning in person for work or certain events. So knowing that each folks' experiences are different. But what are some of the hopes and fears around to the returning to in-person piece? And within multiple spheres, right? Within your personal life, your professional life, and your semi-professional life. And so with that, and then when you return, we'll be asking you to share out sort of what was coming up for you. What were some fears that were surfacing? What were some hopes? And Will and Anne are gonna riff off of that for today's conversation. So here are the prompts. And we're gonna spend about, Hill, like I think we talked about 5 minutes. Does that feel good?
Feels good to me.
We're gonna spend 5 minutes in pairs.
All right, here we go. Amina, did you get the breakout invite? Yes. All right, and Hamida, you got assigned, but there are 3 people in that room, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd sit this one out.
Yeah, you do not have to go join Aubrey for 5 minutes.
No?
You could if you wanted to.
I appreciate that, but I think I'm good.
You'll have other moments to connect with Aubrey.
Yeah.
Oh, here comes Jeanette. Good morning, Jeanette. It's just you. Nobody else showed up.
Oh no.
Just kidding.
This is terrible news.
It's just you and us for the next 50 minutes.
All right. Well, look at that. I like that ratio. So, and I do apologize. I'm just, yeah, just navigating some things over here, so I didn't.
Oh,
quite
no
get on you.
problem. Can I move you to a breakout room?
What's that?
Can I move you to a breakout room? We just sent folks into our icebreaker.
Which
Oh,
is-
got it. There you go. You're
Yes,
picking on
sorry,
me.
you are not, it's not just
Oh.
you.
That was good. I fell for it. Hook, line, and singer. Move me. I'll go back on mute. That was good, Hillary. I'm well played.
All right, I'm sending you off.
Oh, I guess we're in the. Okay. I don't know where Hillary went, but that is
I think
cool.
it's waiting to be assigned, so we'll see what happens next. Maybe she assigned herself while assigning me.
I think so. Yes, she did. So let's assign you.
Sorry, I was in here in a phone call on a phone number, but then I just came in on my video, and in the meantime,
Well, Hill, this makes me wonder.
That, you with Anne, were you in a pair with Anne Partington?
I don't know. I just came into my office and my alarm was going off actually.
Oh.
So then I was like, ah, so I had to fix that.
I think you were with Anne, so I'm gonna send you
Okay.
back there.
Okay.
All right, Hamida, what was your wondering?
No, if we, since we're in a room, if folks could talk with each other about their hopes and fears for returning in person.
Yeah, did you put the prompt back in the chat?
I will shortly.
Hillary, I'm still hovering when you have a chance.
Hovering?
Or was I assigned a
waiting
room?
for a break.
Oh, sorry, you were assigned and I assigned myself instead of you.
That's what we thought. We were like, oh, I'm good, whatever. So
Yeah. But I think Asandi, are you with us?
Yes, good morning.
Welcome. Well, I think if you want to start, each of you, we were just talking about what are your hopes as we return to in-person work. What are you hoping, and what are your fears?
Sure. It's interesting. My fears or pause is around COVID, but probably more around returning to or actually I started a new position during COVID. So, but I'm back at Wayne State, which is where I was before. So I'm familiar with in general, the culture. So my pause is probably more about returning to campus and being in an environment where I have to really just deal with microaggressions and racism in sometimes subtle ways. And I choose to believe sometimes unintentional. So that's actually probably my bigger pause or hesitance around returning to the office is dealing with that. And I just don't freaking feel like it. I do have some sort of, I understand the need and desire, particularly in our situation, while we don't interface with students, the need to kind of return to campus on some level. But I also feel like in some ways, not just Wayne State, but some of these larger organizations, I feel like they're rushing because they feel like they have to, as opposed to really thinking about or rethinking perhaps about the consequences of why, like asking the question about why and how does this really look different, not just to appease your employees, but really what really may make sense for folks' well-being, like physically, emotionally, and mentally, to come back to work, and particularly in places where you don't know if everyone has been vaccinated and you're not band-aiding that. And sometimes people may not be truthful about whether or not they are. So you're still could be coming back to a work environment where you really, you just don't know. And so that just gives me pause. And I will allow someone else to share.
I think we're actually at time, so I'm going to close the breakout rooms.
I'm sorry. I
No,
wanted to
not a
hear what other
problem.
people
Great.
thought.
We've got 60 seconds. So Jeanette, do you want to share briefly?
Well, my work office is a party of one with the setup, but I would say right now my fear is watching other national nonprofits get together this fall. And so I'm having I don't know if it's a fear of missing out, what will be right. Did I call it right or wrong? And I think it's more of an insecurity at this point, to be relative to my members,
Yeah, the sense that there is a right and a wrong way to do this. And
yeah, like, did I make the right decision to postpone the in-person one more year? And then it's, because I'm thinking about that with the Delta variant and other things, it's like, gosh, am I going to collapse the association on being more conservative, which I think is the right decision, but that feeling, did I make the wrong decision, which is just always those insecurities.
yeah.
Jeanette, I resonate with that.
So, yeah.
That's hard.
Well, it looks like folks are returning. And it looks like folks did not want to come back, but we made you come back. We want to invite you just in the chat. Let's start with take a few seconds to share your hopes. Let's see if we can kind of organize hopes in the chat first. What are you hoping for as you return to normal, or to whatever it is that we're returning to? What came up among your hopes? And I'm encouraging you to drop this in the chat so that we kind of have the visual collection there, and so we can share a little bit more. But also, if there are a couple of folks who would like to share verbally, I'm looking for hands here, but you're welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like to share briefly verbally.
Hi,
Will Jones.
my name is Ruth. Is it all right for me to share?
Yes, go ahead, Ruth.
In talking to Aubrey, I realized, and I knew this before, but it helped me articulate better. I want to, both me individually and my organization, to be intentional with transitioning to whatever we're transitioning to, which we don't know, but to restore, renew, refresh our work relationships and to be intentional about that process.
Yes, that sense of refreshing and rebuilding relationships. I've been feeling that recently. Will, what do you want to add?
Oh, I was just looking at what Perry wrote. What's up, Perry? In the chat about like maybe days that are less packed. And that's something that I've appreciated, kind of this sense of autonomy that I think that, at least many of us who are working from home have been able to experience, right? That you, or at least let me speak for myself, that I have been able to, in this space, schedule out more little buffers in my day, right? I've been able to kind of like set aside that time for deep work when I know that I'm not going to be interrupted at all, except for maybe somebody in my household, right? A furry companion or my wife who needs, me to help out with something real quick. But like not just like, side conversation or something, right? That when I need to, I've been able to just like put my head down and grind it out. And I'll just say between us, right? Between us here, that if I finish what I was doing 5, 10, 15 minutes early, there is not like this rush to move on to the next thing, right? It's like I've already got my day scheduled out. I know what my goals are. I know what I'm working towards. So look, if I get done with something a second early, I'm going to step into the backyard, right? Check out, see what's going on in the garden. Maybe run up the street, grab a coffee real quick, or just sit and take a breath for a second. And that, while so much has been in turmoil, has been extremely helpful in a number of ways for me. So I really appreciate you lifting that up, Harry.
Well, Will, that's between us, but we are recording here, but
Whoops.
it's all good. I think, and we've tried to intentionally build, right, like we talk a lot about, Will also works at New. So we talk a lot at New about shifting our workplace culture and this idea that it's not about sitting in the office for 40 hours and
Right.
counting those minutes. It's about getting your projects done according to your work. And I think that's such a difficult concept, I think, to release. But I love that idea of that there is, and as Ebony said, that room for pace, that we can move the pace at humans, at a human pace, and we often accelerate ourselves. Let's shift to fears. I want to invite you in the chat as well to list out some of those fears. And maybe just one or two folks who want to share their fears verbally. Jeanette, go ahead, Diane.
I think my biggest fear is that we will have to close down again, that there are going to be enough people refusing to vaccinate, that there'll be another spike and the world will close down again. And that that's my terror for fall.
Yeah, Jeanette, go ahead.
Yeah, Hillary, I was starting to type it, but I had shared in our small group, I've made the decision again to not host my annual in-person conference. So this will be the second time, and I run a national nonprofit, and I'm having a little fear of missing out when I see other, I guess you would call them competitors or colleagues who currently have plans for a conference. And so I'm just having that feeling of, I do believe it's the right decision for safety and a whole myriad of reasons. But there's a fear of, did I miss an opportunity? And it directly links to my financial sustainability as well. So there's that kind of racing through my head.
Yes. Asanya, can I ask you to share as well? You were in our group as well, and I was appreciating what you shared. Asanya,
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yep, go ahead.
I hadn't thought about that, but I really agree with the previous fear. I will share what I shared in our group was really around, it's related in part to the pandemic, but more so the microaggressions in the office, in the work environment. I'm at Wayne State University, and I just don't want to come back to that. I don't, as a woman that identifies as a Black woman, I'm not eager to be back in that space and deal with it.
Asandi, I can feel that so deeply. You know, I had the privilege of taking the past couple of weeks off to spend some time with family, and we are in a very isolated part of the country. There's not a lot of neighbors around. You only have to see people really when you want to see them. But when we went to town for dinner one night, right, this is like the first time I stepped back into civilization. Of course, somebody had to say something to us as we were walking into a restaurant, right? And it was just like, after having been in a space of peace and tranquility, and just having that one drop of poison back in the well, even after all that purification and cleansing, was just the worst. It kind of like tainted our whole evening, right? So I feel you 100% on that. And that I think is like a huge consideration for all of us as we carry diverse staffs, right? Like, how are we going to ask them to come back into a space that may not be as welcoming and inclusive and rich with a sense of belonging as your home?
That's beautifully said, Will. Thank you. I want to keep us moving and move towards the wisdom that Will and Anne are bringing. So we're going to ask, we'll introduce them and have the two of them share a little bit. But as we move into that conversation, I want to ground us. One of our inspirations in shaping this session today was this quote from Sonia Renee Taylor. And Sonia Renee wrote this very early in the pandemic. That we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than that we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And I remember reading this early in the pandemic and feeling so strongly this sense that yes, this is our time of stitching a new garment. And then as things started to reopen over the last 3 months, feeling such a sense of distress of where's this new garment? What have we stitched? What is this? Are we just returning back to the same thing? And one of the things that I have found hope in is that we're still actively engaged in that process, and that in some ways we are better positioned now to shape a new normal than we were when we were in the midst of this pandemic. And so that's what we really hope that Anne and Will reflect on these active choices that we're making in these moments over the next few months that are going to shape a new normal. So I'm going to invite Hamida to introduce our speakers formally and share a little bit about them.
Thank you for that grounding, Hillary. I think all of us sort of in kind of recreating that sort of garment, like we're all little pieces of that tapestry, right? And how can we inform and bring our own views and needs and wants and our hopes to what the new normal is. So really thanks for that, Hill. So joining us already today is Will Jones III. So he is News Relationship Manager. So as News Relationship Manager, Will is our Chief Fundraiser and Communication Strategist. His work focuses on sharing stories and connecting communities to our work. A writer and creative, Will loves using his creativity to bring folks deeper into our community. When he's not writing grants or publishing our newsletter, Will also loves hosting community events. Will is incredible with food. Committed to his community, Will also works at Black Men Read and volunteers for local dog rescue. He joined NEW as a program coordinator in 2018. We also have Anne Partington joining us. So Anne is a recent grad of NEW's Champions for Change Fellows program and is the director of the Amtrak Innovation Hub for Advanced Transportation at the University of Michigan Office of Tech Transfer. Prior to that, she ran a high-tech accelerator and led diversity, equity, and inclusion for Ann Arbor Spark, as well as had 2 decades of global leadership experience in the automotive industry. Throughout her career, Anne has actively worked to create inclusive ecosystems where differences are embraced and respected, and individuals can feel a sense of belonging and thriving. So welcome, Will, and welcome, Anne, to today's conversation. Hill is gonna start us off.
Yeah, I just, as we're talking and sharing hopes and fears, I would love to, you've started to share a little bit of your hopes and fears. So I wonder if there's anything else you want to share there, but also how are you holding those kind of deep extremes, and how are you staying grounded when you start getting into those fearful spaces, or when you start super honing in on your hopes? How are you balancing that range of emotions? Anne, would you like to share first?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. It's such a delight to be here with all of you in this space as we sort of restart into whatever the next, weeks and months and years are going to hold. For me, Hillary, I am a very, very deep thinker, which is something that I got teased a lot about, even, as a kid through the decades. And so self-reflection is a big part of who I am. And it allows me to sort of think carefully and intentionally about how to connect with others and to provide that space for reflection. I actually have the word in capital letters, pace, because pace is something that we really have to be self-aware of. And I am very guilty of packing it in all day, all night to try to do as much as I can with community organizations that I support, taking care of my rescue dog, trying to cook, listening to my friends, my family, my mom. You always have to make time for your mom, right? All these things that come up and the stresses that people carry, and to really take that time for self-reflection, healing, meditation. I recently took up renting paddleboard occasionally. I really enjoy that. I'm short. It's easy for me to balance. So no judgments here. I'm not very good sports person, but it works for me. And so whatever that space might be, whether it's reflecting on a bench or just taking some time to really unpack, or, be in the garden or with friends, that connection is so important. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but the deep thoughts will continue, embrace who I am, but allow that space for that thinking.
And, one of the things that's been coming up for me, and we started having these conversations at New a little bit before the pandemic even, but at the leadership table, really thinking about like, what are the drivers, what are the continuous drivers of our work and delivering great value to our clients and stakeholders, right? And in those things, we were recognizing that we were just packing everyone's day with meetings, right? Or that folks really didn't have a bunch of time to actually do the work that folks were committing to in meetings, right? So then it became, okay, well, we're going to encourage everyone to block off a fifth of their work week, right? Regardless of whether you're part-time or full-time, for deep work. Don't take any meetings, right? Schedule it however you need to. If it's across several days, if it's one day, just make that time. And then after that, the conversation started to be around, kind of time for professional development and time for reflection, and how are we baking that into our work day or our work weeks and the expectations for our team, so that it's not another burden, right? Because I feel sometimes, particularly in this, I don't know, the push to have work-life balance, right? There's all these different things that people have to do. Oh, you've got to have an athletic hobby so that you're staying fit. You have to have a creative, artistic hobby so that you're getting it all out and not letting it bundle up, right? And at least for me, moving through this last year and some change, I've really gotten to see just how much folks have on their plate in a completely different way. Just being in people's homes and seeing their kids and their pets and their family members, their extended family members who might stay and live with them, right? Somebody gets sick, just all of that stuff that takes up time. And then feeling this push to do all the other things to be this perfect human in your 8 waking hours outside of work, right? So, one of my push is going to be how do we continue to make that space in the workday for folks? And I'm wondering, given your experience, you've moved through the tech sector, you've done a whole bunch of different stuff, right? Have you seen that kind of in play? And if so, how are folks doing that?
I think you bring up a great point, which is how do we stay connected? How do we stay compassionate to ourselves, to our work communities, to our neighborhoods, to the spaces in our social connections, all of those things. And a couple things. I think that compassionate leadership has sometimes been thought of as being soft, when in reality is when you can create a cohesive community and really help people feel that they can bring their authentic selves, they come up with all kinds of innovative ideas and see things from perspectives that are so vastly different. It's like the solution that I may never have thought of, someone else sees in a blink of an eye because they've lived a different experience. Their story is different than mine. And, creating that culture of bring your authentic self, your whole beautiful, imperfect, amazing background and who you are and what you want to achieve and share. And then how do we collectively work together to find those solutions? So, Will, when you ask about my work in the mobility and transportation space, solutions have a tremendous impact on equity, right? How do people get to work? How do people who may have physical limitations? My father had a physical disability, a spinal cord injury. We had to rethink the entire way we lived, right? How to provide a quality of life, how to get from place to A to B. How do you do that if you don't have an urban solution and you're in a space where you have to have transportation? So to answer your question, what I'm really hopeful of, and I'm going to ingrain this into this conversation, is that we use, the heart that we felt over the last year, that we look beyond the curated scenes that we see of each other, right? My room behind me is a mess. I'm in my son's room. We just moved. There's boxes everywhere. I've got a tranquil picture of the lake behind me, right? I'm just being real. That we use our heads, our brains to think, we use our hearts to open up our minds, to really listen to others' stories, and that we use our hands collectively to figure out solutions and drive action together.
That authenticity, that connection on like a human level, that's my hope and fear. That's my big hope and fear, is that my hope is that we'll hold on to this and not forget. Like Marion, who was in my small group at the beginning, was saying that we won't like kind of forget, that we went through all this together, because our track record for long-term memory isn't great as a society. It's not great. And so, I too am really holding on to that and really hoping that, we'll remember all of those moments of seeing a kid, come in to ask a question about homework, or, the dog starts barking at the postal worker for no reason. And now you have to like take a 5-minute pause in your, board presentation because there was a disruption, right? I'm really hoping that like the humanity can win out over all of that like formality and I don't know, the almost like pomp and circumstance that we've kind of put into place to keep ourselves from being human. Like one of these things actually, like I know that we're supposed to talk about like super practical stuff at some point in time. So one of the things that I really want to kind of like push forward along that authenticity line is folks, when you can, or I want to encourage you to abandon your dress codes. I think when you're working with kids, right, and vulnerable populations, like there's obviously some things around that have to shift. There have to be some protections. You don't want like profanity on a t-shirt when you're working with kids, or violent imagery or something like that. And at the same time, we've been joking since last March about how people are wearing their pajamas underneath the Zoom screen. And I'm gonna be 100 with you all right now. I am wearing the single pair of like sweat shorts that my brother got me for Christmas 2 years ago underneath. Like I've got this polo on top because I know what's going on here, right? And like when we return, why would we forget that? Why would we pretend like we haven't all been sitting around in our pajamas for the last year, still getting our work done, right? Still showing up professionally in email, still showing up professionally in Zoom, still treating our clients with the respect that they deserve, right? All of those things have been there. You just have been doing it in jorts or whatever it is that you've got, you know, on. And so as we're going forward, like, if we want people to feel like they can authentically be themselves, let's not continue to put forward the, frankly, professional standards created by cisgendered hetero white men from certain small region of Europe, right? While we're not acknowledging all of the myriad of ways that different cultures represent and show up authentically and professionally, right? We put people into, you have to conform to this, and let's not. And I feel like we talk a lot about like this idea of letting people show up authentically, but there's still expectations that you're going to conform in some ways or another. And if we want people to show up authentically the same way that they are able to in their homes and connect with each other the same way that we've been able to, just human to human, it means we have to remove these other trappings, right? So that's one of the things that's coming up for me around that.
I love that, Will. And, you know, I think there is also the ability to model what that looks like to help others feel that courage and that bravery, right? And if you're in a position in a community organization or your own organization where you work or at home or in your community where you can model that authenticity and really show who you truly are, and, you know, then I think that also opens the door and is an invitation to others to bring their whole authentic self as well.
Yeah.
So, I love that. And, you know, it's something we're going to have to work on because we've been connecting in a really different way. So maybe you mentioned that you had just been out on your trip and you had an experience. I think you referred to it as a drop of poison. That really kind of stuck with me. And Ruth made a comment in the comments about restoring, renewing, and refreshing. And so, you know, I kind of think of this time as being a restart versus a new normal, because I'm not quite sure what the word normal means, as Hillary pointed out. So let's talk about this restart time. And could you talk a little bit about, you know, how do you think we can be more compassionate in how we speak to one another to sort of create this space of authenticity? And then also, if you're on the receiving end of something that is a drop of poison, you know, let's talk about that too. How does that feel? How do we allow ourselves to process that?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the tactics that I've seen employed to really kind of like hold space for that, like everything that's going on, is just like a simple at the beginning of it. Some folks call it like a temperature check. But other, you know, in another space, I had someone just ask, like, sincerely, what's distracting you from being fully present in this gathering, right? And it allowed folks to just kind of share everything, whether it had been that they're coming in on the receiving end of a microaggression, whether it's that, oh, my kid is about to take their driver's permit test, you know, and I'm super, super excited for them and super kind of nervous at the same time, or knowing that there's like another meeting coming up after that, right? Like whatever those things are, just being able to invite and evoke that authentic candor from the rip on, okay, this is what's real for me in this space right now, I think is just one of the ways that, you know, we can continue to not only surface all of those things, but to normalize them, right? That work isn't this box that exists outside of the rest of your life, which is kind of like why that term work-life balance is such a twisted thing in the first place, as if like your work isn't a part of your life and your life isn't a part of your work, when all of us in the nonprofit sector know very deeply how intensely those things are connected, right? And if it hasn't been for you in the past, I'm sure that it most certainly was in this last year, right? So I think, yeah, you know, like really creating that space. And then the other thing that's been really present for me around this is like all of this only works when we have trust and relationship. We're in like good relationship with each other, right? I saw somebody mentioned earlier on, and I forgive me, I haven't been able to keep up with all the comments in the chat. A concern about having not built those relationships with the new people who have come onto their team. And I was like, for new, I think we've had 6 people join us since the pandemic began. So there was a culture in place before, right? And then there's a culture that started to emerge because of COVID. And then 6 months, a year later, a new culture has emerged in the wake of all of that, right? And just getting folks to feel connected no matter when they come into that, I think it takes intention. So like there is something worthwhile in having a meeting that's not really a meeting, in having a meeting that's more like a happy hour or like a game time or something. And obviously like structure that accordingly and appropriately, right? Like don't interrupt somebody in the middle of their day for that. Do it at the end. But it's still like those human, I get to know the people that work with me, they get to know me. Like all of that stuff is critical, right? And when we aren't able to do it because we're not like standing around the water cooler or eating lunch in the same room or whatever, then we have to like be intentional about making that time and space. And I know, you know, I know Jeanette was talking about earlier having to like scale back on something that's like a revenue producer, and there's tension around that, right? I know that there's going to be tension for all of us as we're thinking about creating more space for professional development, space for, you know, reflection and deep work, space for team building and culture building, because those are hours that we're not necessarily, you know, working with clients or fulfilling on programs that are, you know, connected to our grant work. And I would just encourage folks to like think of it as that stuff is still part of the work. It's still required for us to do all of the other stuff as authentically and as impactfully as we intend to, right? So yeah, I hope that I don't know, Ann. You got me going.
I'm gonna pause it right there because we do want to leave a little bit of time for conversation and for pulling out some of the threads and the ways this is landing. So I want to invite folks, if you have a question, go ahead and type your name in the chat. That helps us kind of track what the questions are, or put your question directly in the chat so that we can start bringing in your voices, or anything that this is bringing up for you. And maybe we'll, oh, go ahead, Ann.
I was just going to say, while you're doing that, I just wanted to acknowledge that I love the reflections about the authenticity and the identity that we feel in our own cultural clothing. There's a number of comments throughout, and, you know, really acknowledging our ancestry and our ethnicity. It's a beautiful thing. So I just wanted to point out that there's some lovely comments in the chat about that as well.
And Mina, it looks like you came off mute. Did you have a thought?
Oh, sorry. No, I just meant to come off video. Apologies.
Not a problem.
I wanted to actually share something that I've been reflecting on, if that's okay.
Yes.
So I joined a little late. My name is Rita Talib. I'm a native Detroiter and I'm a small business owner. Like Will, I enjoy writing and do some grant writing. So that brings me so much joy. As I was listening to everybody express themselves and share some ideas, something came to mind to me that I've been focusing on. I think for me, the pandemic, one of the silver linings in this chaos and in how brutal it's been for so many of us folks of color is how can we really focus on creating joy for ourselves? And that for me is the biggest takeaway of this entire pandemic, is that how can I, with all of the obstacles, adversities, and the challenges that I myself as an Arab and Muslim woman face in the workspace as well as the world. Like every time I step out of my home, I feel like I have to protect all of the intersects of my identity. And that leaves me with so much anxiety. And it leaves me feeling so depleted that my battery is like lower and lower until I come back home to my my safe haven, my space, and my my tribe, if you will, that I'm surrounded by. And so I think for me, something that's important in moving forward with all of our fears that we've collectively shared is how can we continue focusing on where that joy truly emerges? And if we focus on that, and if we allow people to collectively manifest that from a plural space rather than a, you know, to Will's point, the cisgender, you know, heterosexual white male perspective. Actually, I think that's a great driver for value adds that people can contribute to the workspace. And what I've found in my own experience, as well as the folks that I'm surrounded by, that's actually where we are the most quote unquote productive. The brilliance and the genius that we create as a people comes when we are permitted to be, I'm going to use a metaphor here, when we are planted in soil that is nurtured and watered, and we're given sunlight and freedom to just be ourselves, and we're rooted in that. And so I think, you know, I just wanted to add that, because joy can also be a driver for value, for quote unquote productivity and creation. And so that's just kind of what I've been reflecting on. And I was wondering if anybody else had been feeling the same way.
Oh, 100%. And it was Retta, correct?
It's Rita.
Rita, I'm sorry. I was like, oh gosh. My apologies there, Rita. Like, yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. I'm there with you. Even like returning to work from being on vacation yesterday. So I did myself a favor. I didn't, even though I was back at work, I left my vacation responder up and I blocked out my first day, right? Nobody was putting meetings on my calendar the day that I get back from a 2-week-long vacation. It's not going to happen. And then the other things that I did, like I just kind of took my day slower, right? I created moment. I remember like going upstairs first thing, you know, I got a stick of incense and I burned it in my office because I was like, you know what? I'm going to start this day good vibes, right? And I'm just going to continue and carry that through. And that's what I needed for me to be able to have that moment of joy while doing my work, right? And I think that really requires us to ask questions about like, what is the office for? Because if we're asking people, everybody to be in the office all the time, it's really not that likely that people are going to be able to make those little changes or do that little atmospheric stuff that helps them feel happy and joyful in their space at work, right? And there's so much beauty that comes out of that collaboration, that being together, right? So what does it look like when folks can come to a meeting together fully charged because they've been in their, you know, restorative bubble at home, right? And they can come into the meeting, give their whole authentic, brilliant, creative selves to that time and space, and then return to where they need to be to recharge and to continue to do work, as opposed to just being in that setting of drain for 8 hours a day because that's what we say has to happen. I'm also feeling some thoughts around productivity and creativity right now, but I want to shut up and let Ann hop in here.
And I want to know, I'd love to bring in Diane, has had a hand up for a little while. So Diane, I want to invite you to share your thought, and we may not be able to quite build on it.
Okay. What I wanted to say is that I look at the faces on this screen. I'm reasonably certain that my youngest son is older than all of you, which gives me a certain viewpoint that most of you don't have. And I'm going to express that through a mask that I wore proudly through much of the pandemic, which said, your first mistake was assuming I was just another old woman. And I would encourage all of you, when I think back on my younger years, I wish I had been my true self. I wish I had worried less about what other people thought about me and more about what I thought about myself. And pandemic or no pandemic, that being who you are. I kept my mouth closed at times. I never should have kept my mouth closed. And so I'm being that old woman here again today saying, you know, be yourself, be true to yourself, stand up for yourself, and stand up for those you love and care for. That's all.
Thank you. And I think that's going to transition us into our wrap up. So Hamida, do you want to take it?
Diane, I just want to thank you for that really kind, insightful kind of thought, and also knowing that we all have room to be ourselves, of old, in between, like me, young. We all still have a chance. So we hope that this session was helpful for you, that you learned something, emerged with something to chew on. Hill is going to insert a survey into the chat that asks, you know, what went well, what could have been better. So please take a few moments to let us know how you experienced this. And also join us next month to talk about adequacy and abundance, a session that's really going to explore how do we think about what we need, and how do we allow our space to dream for abundance and think beyond the bare minimum. So please join us next month for that. As we're going through, I'm going to offer a few conversation gems that were popping up as our speakers and as you shared. So remember to choose and maintain your pace as you can. Reflect, meditate, find and hold on to joy. Prioritize your values. Think about what you really have to do. Decide what really needs to change. Plan how to continue to make space in the workday for our humanness. Remember, compassion does not equal soft. Bring and showcase your authentic self. Remember where we've been and the lessons that we've learned. Life is complex. Release the pomp and circumstance of formalities. Decide what the office is really for. Uncomfortable dress pants don't help us work better. Rethink the dress code and what it means to look professional. Clothing can be a revolutionary act and an expression of our authenticity. Acknowledge and invoke authentic candor. Remember that trust and connectedness matters. We move at the speed of trust. Intentionally create those formerly unintentional informal spaces. Be aware of your battery, what depletes it, and what recharges it. When planted in nurtured soil, we can be rooted in freedom. Joy is a gem in itself and can help us do things that we want to do. Be who you are, be true to yourself, stand up for yourself and those you love and care for. Thank you for joining us today, everyone.